Clara Bennett pressed both hands flat on that store counter and did not shake. She had promised herself she would not shake. The braid, coiled between her palms, was 19 inches long, golden brown, the last thing about her that still looked like the woman she used to be. Ellie was home in a fever. The well had given its last cup 3 days ago, and the man behind that counter was taking too long to answer. Before this story goes any further, if you've ever had to choose between your pride and your child's life, this one is for you. Subscribe. Stay until the end and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The braid hit the counter at 9:07 on a Tuesday morning in July of 1878, and every man inside Harper's General Store heard it land. It was not a loud sound. Braided hair does not make a loud sound. But the silence that had already been sitting in that store since Clara Bennett pushed through the door was the kind of silence that turned small things enormous. And 19 inches of a woman's hair placed on a merchant's counter like a payment offering was not a small thing. Not in Drywater Crossing. Not in that summer. Clara kept her chin level. She had practiced that on the road into town. Eyes forward, chin level. Do not apologize before anyone has said a word. Gerald Harper stood behind the counter and looked at the braid and then looked at Clara and then looked at the braid again. He was a man who measured everything twice before he committed to a number, and Clara had known this about him for 3 years, and she had still come to him because he was the only man in Drywater Crossing who traded in Denver goods and kept fever tonic on the shelf. "Mrs. Bennett," he said. "I need flour," Clara said. 20 pounds. Fever tonic 2 bottles, and whatever water you'll give me for the rest." Harper's mouth moved without sound for a moment. Behind Clara, someone shifted their boots on the floorboards. She did not turn around. "Clara," Harper said quieter now, dropping the misses like it cost him something. "I can't take hair as trade. You know that. I run a store, not a wig trader comes through from Denver on the 15th of every month," Clara said. "I know because my neighbor sold to him twice before she left the territory. You hold the goods, you take 15%, and you send the rest out with the supply wagon. I've seen the ledger entry. You did it for Mrs. Abel in April." Harper's jaw tightened. "That was a different arrangement." "It was the same arrangement," Clara said. "The only thing different is the woman standing in front of you." The silence deepened. Someone coughed near the back of the store. Clara felt the attention in the room, the way she felt the July heat everywhere pressing, inescapable, but she kept her eyes on Harper and her hands flat on the counter, and she did not shake. "I've got a sick child at home," she said. "I've got a well that's been dry since Saturday. I've got nothing left to sell except what's on that counter, and I am asking you to honor the same arrangement you gave another woman in this town 4 months ago. That's all I'm asking." Harper looked at the braid again. He looked like a man doing arithmetic he didn't want to finish. "I can hold it," he said slowly, "but I can't guarantee the price. Trader might not want it. Might not be the quality he's—" "It's 19 inches, Clara said. "You can see what it is." "Clara." His voice dropped lower, almost gentle, which was somehow worse. "Even if I hold it, I can't extend full credit on a maybe. I can give you 1 bottle of tonic and 10 pounds of flour against the probable, my daughter has had a fever for 4 days. I understand that, but 4 days, Mr. Harper, in this heat, with no water." The floorboards shifted again behind her, closer this time. The lady said 2 bottles. "Pommy." The voice came from the far end of the store, low and unhurried, the way a man speaks when he's not in the habit of raising it. Clara turned despite herself. He was leaning against the far shelf with his arms crossed, tall, dark-haired, wearing a hat so sweat-stained it had lost its original color. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. His jaw had 4 days of beard on it. He was looking at Harper with the flat, patient expression of a man who had decided something before anyone else in the room caught up. Cole Mercer. She knew him the way everyone in a 30-mile stretch of territory knew Cole Mercer by reputation and occasional sighting, the way you know a mountain is there without having climbed it. "This isn't your business, Mercer," Harper said. "2 bottles of tonic," Cole said, pushing off the shelf and walking forward. He reached into his vest pocket and set coins on the counter without counting them. 20 pounds of flour, and whatever water credit she needs. Put it on my account." Clara stepped sideways to put herself between him and the counter. "No," she said. Cole stopped. He looked at her directly for the first time. His eyes were darker than she'd expected, and they were reading her face the way you read a map when you're not sure where the road has gone. "Ma'am, I did not ask for your money," Clara said. "I asked Mr. Harper to honor a trade arrangement he's made before. That's a different thing entirely." "I understand that," Cole said. "Then step back." He did not step back, but he didn't push forward either. He stood where he was and looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately name, not pity, not condescension, something closer to recognition. "How long has the child been sick?" he asked. "That's not your concern. Humor me." 4 days, she said, because she was tired, and the word came out before the wall went back up. 4 days of fever. Her water intake is almost nothing. She needs the tonic today, not when the Denver trader decides my hair meets his standard. Cole nodded once. He reached past her and picked up the braid from the counter. Clara's hand snapped out and caught his wrist. Her grip was harder than she intended. He went very still. "That is mine," she said. "I know it is," he said. "I'm putting it in your bag." He held her eyes and did exactly that, folded the braid carefully, and placed it in the burlap sack she'd come in with. "You're not selling anything today." He turned back to the counter. "Harper, 2 tonics, 20 pounds of flour, 2 full water casks. My account." Harper moved. Clara stood in the center of that store and felt the specific, suffocating humiliation of being helped by someone she hadn't asked and couldn't repay in front of a room full of men who would talk about it before noon. She understood that the child needed the tonic. She understood that pride was a currency that spent badly in a drought year. She understood all of it with perfect clarity, and it made no difference at all to how she felt. She turned and walked out the door. He caught up with her at the wagon. She heard his boots on the hardpack and kept loading the casks without turning around. "Mrs. Bennett, I'll repay you," she said. "Every cent. I'll need an itemized figure and a reasonable term, and I'll put it in writing if you want it in writing." "I don't want it in writing." "Then you'll have it anyway," she said. "I don't carry unpaid debts." "All right." He set a hand on the wagon gate, not touching her, just steadying it while she lifted. "I've got something else to say if you'll hear it." She stopped lifting. She turned and looked at him. Close up, Cole Mercer was older than she'd first placed him, mid-30s, with the kind of weathered skin that came from years of working under the same sun that was currently turning her corn into straw. There was nothing soft about him except the way he was standing, which was careful, like he knew he had to be. "I need a cook," he said. Clara stared at him. "Not a housekeeper," he said quickly. "A cookhouse manager, for the cattle season. I've got 14 hands at the height of drive prep, and my last cook walked off 3 weeks ago over a wage dispute that was his fault, not mine. The cookhouse runs from 4 in the morning until the hands turn in. It is hard work in summer heat, and it pays $11 a month with a cabin for you and your girl, and full water access from the Ranch Creek." He said it the way you'd read a bill of sale. Flat, factual, nothing added. Clara was quiet for a moment. $11, she said. Plus provisions. You eat what the hands eat, and right now that's better than most of the county is managing. What happened to your last cook? Underpaid him for 3 months, and he told me so in front of the whole crew, Cole said. He was right. I fixed the number, and he left anyway because he had a sister in Kansas City, and the fixing came too late. I don't make the same error twice. You're telling me you underpaid the last man who worked that position, and now you're offering me the corrected rate? Yes. Why would that be? Because I told you about it, he said. I didn't have to. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The sun was already vicious, and it wasn't yet 10 in the morning. She thought about the dry well. She thought about Ellie's breathing last night, the way it had that shallow, papery quality that put cold hands around her heart every time she woke to listen for it. I want it in writing, she said. Done. The cabin. I see it before I agree to anything. Fair. And my daughter is not ranch decoration. She goes where I go. She sleeps where I sleep, and no hand on your payroll speaks to her in a way I don't approve. Cole's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. Understood. I am coming to do a job, Clara said. Not to be settled, not to be looked after, not to be anyone's cause. I will run your cookhouse, and I will do it well, and at the end of the season, we will be square. That's all I'm asking, Cole said. She looked at him for another beat, searching for the catch, the softness disguised as calculation, the rescue dressed up as employment. She had seen enough of the first kind to know what it smelled like. Whatever this was, it didn't smell like that. It smelled like a man in genuine trouble who had made a decision based on what was practical. I'll need today, she said, to get Ellie settled enough to move. Take tomorrow too, he said. My foreman Wade Turner will send a hand with a full water barrel this afternoon. Don't argue about the water. That one isn't negotiable. Clara opened her mouth to argue about it anyway. He raised one hand. Your child, he said. Not your pride. Two different things. She closed her mouth. He tipped his hat a short direct motion, nothing theatrical about it, and walked back toward the hitching post without looking to see if she was watching. She was watching. By the time she turned the wagon home, the tonic was already packed against her knee, and the flour was wedged between the water casks, and the braid was still in the burlap bag uncut, which meant she had left town with more than she came with, and that had not happened in 8 months. The last time she'd left anywhere with more than she came with was the day Thomas was still alive, and they'd sold a good calf at Glenwood Market, and come home in the late afternoon feeling like the world owed them something. She did not let herself stay in that memory. She had learned how to move through those without stopping. The way you move through smoke quickly without breathing too deep. Ellie was awake when she got home. That was the first good thing. She was sitting up in the bed with the quilt pushed to her waist and her hair damp from sleep, and when she heard the wagon, she called out from the window, "Mama!" "I'm here," Clara said. She was through the door before the echo of her own voice stopped. "I've got the tonic." Ellie watched her mother pour the first dose with the measuring cup they'd been using since before she could remember, and she swallowed it without complaint because she was 6 years old and already had the sense to know this was not a situation for complaint. "Are we going to be all right?" Ellie asked. Clara smoothed the hair back from her daughter's forehead and checked the heat in her skin. Still too warm. Coming down maybe slightly. Maybe. "Yes," she said. "You always say yes." "Because it's always been true," Clara said. "Lie back." Ellie lay back. She watched her mother through heavy eyes. "A man named Cole Mercer is going to send water this afternoon," Clara said. "When the hand comes with the barrel, I need you to rest and not bother him." "Who is Cole Mercer?" "A rancher. We're going to work for him for the summer." "Work doing what?" "Cooking, managing his cookhouse." Ellie was quiet for a moment. "Is he mean?" "No," Clara said. "I don't think so." "Is he like Mr. Boone?" The name landed like a stone in standing water. Silas Boone had come to the property twice since Thomas died, once to express his condolences, and once to express his interest in the creek rights that ran along the western edge of the Bennett homestead. The second conversation had not gone pleasantly, and Ellie had heard enough of it from the other room to know the shape of the man. "He is not like Mr. Boone," Clara said. He is very different from Mr. Boone. Now rest. She sat beside the bed until Ellie's breathing evened out, and then she went to the table and opened the small tin box where she kept what passed for the household accounts. There was $1.14 in coin. There was a promissory note from the Glenwood Bank with Thomas's signature and her counter-signature and a number on it that had been keeping her awake since March. There was a letter from her brother in Ohio that she had read twice and could not respond to because responding would mean admitting things she wasn't ready to admit to anyone who might feel obligated to come out here and rescue her. She didn't want to be rescued. That was the thing people didn't understand or didn't try to understand. She wanted to stand. She wanted to find her footing in this terrible sun-baked year and stand. She had done it before. She had stood through the first winter after Thomas stood through the spring that gave them nothing but mud and a dead calf, stood through the summer that was now actively trying to finish what the previous seasons had started. She had stood through all of it, and she would stand through this. She just needed to get Ellie through the fever first. The water barrel arrived at 3 in the afternoon, hauled by a young ranch hand with a sunburned neck, who introduced himself as Percy and said exactly 4 words to her, "Ma'am, from Mr. Mercer," before unloading the barrel and leaving without asking for anything in return. Clara stood in the yard and watched him go, and then looked at the barrel for a long moment before she dragged over the wash basin and filled it. She soaked a cloth and brought it in and laid it across Ellie's forehead. Ellie opened her eyes. "Cold," she said. "Good," Clara said. "That's the idea." "Mama." "What?" "You didn't sell your hair." Clara sat back in the chair beside the bed. She reached up and touched the braid still coiled at the back of her neck still intact. "No," she said. "I didn't." "Why not?" "Because someone made a better offer," she said. Ellie looked at her for a moment with the unnerving directness that 6-year-olds sometimes produce, the kind of look that didn't know yet how to be polite about what it was seeing. "Are you scared?" Ellie asked. Clara considered lying. She was very good at lying for the right reasons, and this would have been a right reason. But Ellie was watching her with those dark, clear eyes, and the fever had not taken the sharpness out of them, and Clara found she couldn't do it. "A little," she said. "Of what?" "Of needing something from someone I don't know yet." Ellie seemed to think about this. "Mr. Mercer sent the water, though." "He did." "That's a good sign." "Signs can be wrong," Clara said. "Mama." Ellie closed her eyes. "You always say that, but they're usually right." Clara sat in the chair until the room went dim, and the heat in Ellie's skin began slowly with painful reluctance to ease. She was still sitting there when the evening dropped the temperature by 10 degrees, and the first real breath of air came through the window crack. She pulled the quilt up over her daughter's shoulders. She thought about a man who had put her hair back in her bag without asking permission, and told her the honest reason his last employee quit, and then stated the terms of employment the way you'd read the weather, plain without embellishment, expecting nothing except that she hear him. She didn't know what to make of Cole Mercer. She had spent 3 years on this land knowing exactly what she was dealing with at every hour of every day, and the certainty of that, even when what she was dealing with was bad, had been something to hold on to. Cole Mercer was not something she knew yet. She decided that was acceptable. She had survived worse uncertainty than one rancher's intentions. She went to bed. In the morning, she packed 2 bags for herself and 1 small bag for Ellie, checked the braid was still coiled and intact, folded the promissory note into her coat pocket, where she could feel it against her ribs, and began the work of getting her daughter ready to move. She was Clara Bennett. She was 27 years old. She had buried a husband and kept a child alive through a drought and an empty well and a summer that seemed personally determined to see her finished. She was not finished. She packed the bags and she walked out into the morning heat, and she began. Mercer Ranch sat 4 miles east of Drywater Crossing, and Clara knew it was larger than she'd pictured the moment Wade Turner's wagon turned through the gate and she saw the cookhouse, standing separate from the main house with its own chimney and its own door and its own water line running from the creek pump. It was not a woman's fantasy of a kitchen. It was a working structure built for volume and speed, and Clara looked at it the way a carpenter looks at raw timber, not with sentiment, but with calculation about what it could become. There was a lean, weathered man in his 50s who talked the way most foremen talked efficiently, without softening anything. He showed her the cookhouse, the supply inventory, the schedule board nailed beside the door with the hand count and meal times written in pencil. He handed her the keys to the cabin without ceremony, told her the creek pump needed 2 primes before it gave clean water, and said the hands ate at 5 in the morning, noon and 6:30 in the evening, no exceptions, and that the last cook had let the noon meal go late twice before anyone brought it up, and both times the afternoon work had suffered. "I don't run late," Clara said. Wade looked at her with the flat appraisal of a man who had heard that sentence before. "All right," he said without committing to believing it. She didn't argue. She knew the only proof that mattered was the kind that showed up on a plate before the hands got hungry enough to be difficult about it. She got Ellie settled in the cabin, a small, honest space, 2 cots, a window that faced east, a water basin that actually worked, and then went back to the cookhouse and stood in the middle of it and took full inventory before she touched anything. She found the dry goods, located the current provisions, identified what was running low and what had been over-ordered, and discovered that the previous cook had been storing the salt barrel in a spot that guaranteed moisture damage. She moved it before she did anything else. The first meal she put out was supper that same evening, and she made it with what was available: biscuits, salt pork beans with dried onion and pepper. Nothing remarkable, nothing wasted, every portion correct. She stood at the counter while the hands filed in and watched how they ate, because how men eat tells you what they've been going without. They ate fast, and they ate everything, and no one complained about the salt ratio, which meant the last cook had been under-seasoning for weeks, and the men had simply accepted it. That told her a great deal about the culture of the ranch, about who had been accommodating whom. Cole was not at supper that night. Wade said he was out on the South Range checking fence lines after reports of a cut wire near the Boone property boundary. Clara filed that information quietly and said nothing about it. By the 3rd morning, she had restructured the supply rotation, identified which hands were picky eaters and which were grateful for anything, and established a rhythm in the cookhouse that the 5 in the morning bell no longer required her to run for. She had also noticed that Ellie, whose fever had broken cleanly on the 2nd day, had begun drifting toward the corral fence in the late afternoon to watch the horses being worked. She had told her twice to stay back from the fence. On the 3rd afternoon, she found her not at the fence, but inside it, sitting on the top rail with both small hands gripping the post beside her, watching a ranch hand named Denny put a young quarter horse through its paces in the near paddock. Clara came through the gate at a pace she controlled very carefully so she didn't startle the horse. "Ellie." "I'm just watching," Ellie said without turning. "You're inside the fence." "Denny said it was okay." Clara looked at Denny. Denny was 22 years old and had the look of a young man who had just realized he'd made an error in judgment. He opened his mouth. Clara spoke first. "She comes out now," she said. Not loud, not sharp enough to upset the horse, just final. Denny nodded quickly. Ellie climbed down from the rail with the elaborate dignity of a child who disagreed with the decision, but had calculated the cost of saying so. She walked out through the gate. Clara latched it behind them. "I wasn't going to fall," Ellie said. "That's not the only way to get hurt near a horse being worked." "He's beautiful," Ellie said, as if that addressed the point. "He is," Clara said, "and he weighs 1,200 pounds. Come help me with the bread." Ellie came. She was quiet for most of the mixing, which was unusual, and then she said without looking up from the dough, "Mr. Mercer watches you." Clara's hands did not pause. "What do you mean?" "When you're serving. He sits at the end of the table and he watches you. Not in a bad way." Ellie added quickly, in the tone of a child who has learned to qualify things. "Just, he looks." "Men look at whoever is running the cookhouse," Clara said. "It tells them whether the food is going to be adequate." Ellie said nothing. Her expression said she was not convinced, but had decided not to press it. She was not wrong that Cole watched. Clara had noticed it herself, the same way you notice a sound that doesn't quite fit the pattern of sounds you've grown used to. Not intrusively, not with anything she could name as a problem, but steadily. He sat at the end of the long table, and he ate without complaint. And when she moved through the cookhouse, refilling cups, or pulling the bread from the rack, she occasionally looked up and found his eyes on her, and he did not look away quickly the way men did when they were caught staring. He just held her gaze for a measured second and then went back to his food, as if he was not embarrassed by looking, and did not intend to pretend he hadn't been. It unsettled her, not unpleasantly. That was what unsettled her about it. The first real test came at the end of the first week. Two of the older hands, a man called Russ and another called Pete, both of whom had worked the ranch for longer than anyone else, came to the cookhouse door on Friday evening after supper had cleared. Clara was washing the pot when they appeared in the doorway. She looked up. "Mrs. Bennett," Russ said. He was turning his hat in both hands. "We got a concern." "All right," she said. "The men are saying you changed the supply schedule." "I did." "Russ put that schedule in place 3 years ago," Pete said. "I understand that," Clara said. She set the pot on the rack and dried her hands. The previous schedule had salt pork delivery every 10 days, which made sense in a cooler season. In summer, with this heat and this crew size, it spoils on day 8. I moved the delivery to every 7 days and renegotiated with Harper to hold a standing order. Russ stared at her. "You renegotiated with Harper?" "Yesterday morning. He gave us a slight cost reduction in exchange for the guaranteed weekly order. I have the new terms in writing in the supply ledger if you want to review them." Russ and Pete looked at each other. "That's—" Pete started. Stopped. "A better arrangement," Clara finished. "Yes." Russ turned his hat one more rotation. "Cole, know you went into town. I left a note for Wade before I went. The cookhouse was covered. Supper was prepped before I left, and I was back before the hands came in." There was a silence. "We didn't mean offense," Russ said finally. "I know," Clara said. "You came because something changed and you wanted to understand why. That's reasonable. Now you know why." She turned back to the wash basin. "Supper tomorrow is going to be beef stew with cornbread. There'll be enough." They left. She heard Pete say something to Russ outside the door, too low to catch. She didn't try to catch it. She had learned a long time ago that you cannot manage what men say when they think you can't hear them. You can only manage what they see when you're in front of them. What Cole said when he heard about it came 3 days later, because Wade apparently mentioned it to him in the course of a general ranch update, and Cole apparently held that information for 3 days before he chose to address it. He came into the cookhouse alone in the mid-afternoon when it was between meals and she was working on the ledger. He sat down across the work table from her without being invited, which she noted, and said, "You went to Harper." "I left Wade a note," Clara said without looking up from the ledger. "You reorganized the supply contract." "I improved it." She looked up. "Would you like to see the terms?" "I already looked at them in the ledger." He was watching her with that steady, unreadable expression. "You saved us about 40 cents a week." "Closer to 45, she said. "Annualized across the season, that's enough for another half cord of wood before winter if you're planning ahead." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You're calculating my winter supply already." "Habit," Clara said. "I used to manage the household accounts for my husband, planning for the next season while you're in the middle of the current one." She paused. "Is that a problem?" "No," Cole said. "I'm trying to figure out if I underpaid you." She held his gaze. "You paid me what we agreed. Maybe the agreement was wrong." "Mr. Mercer." She closed the ledger. "If you change the wage mid-arrangement, I'll wonder why, and wondering will make the arrangement complicated. Leave it where it is, and we'll renegotiate at the end of the season the same way any honest business would." He looked at her for a long beat. Something moved in his face that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. "All right," he said. He got up. He was almost to the door when she said without planning to, "Russ and Pete came to see me." He stopped, turned. "They were concerned about the supply change," she said. "They weren't rude about it. But I want you to know in case it comes back to you differently than it happened." "What did you say to them?" "I explained the reasoning," she said. "They accepted it." He nodded once. "Good." He looked at her for another moment. "Mrs. Bennett, are you—" He stopped. "What? Are you eating enough?" He said it plainly, the way he said most things, without the softness that would have made it condescending. "I've watched how the cookhouse runs. You feed everyone else first." Clara felt something close up in her chest that she recognized as the reflex she'd developed over 8 months of not allowing people to notice her needs before she'd handled everyone else's. "I eat plenty," she said. "The biscuits from this morning," he said. "There were 2 left. I saw you wrap them for Ellie. I didn't see you take any." "I had an early one before the hands came in." "Did you?" She looked at him steadily. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate the observation. I don't need monitoring." "I know you don't," he said. "I'm mentioning it anyway." He opened the door. "There's half a roasted chicken left from last night on the top shelf. It's not spoken for." He left. Clara stood in the empty cookhouse for a moment. Then she got up and checked the top shelf. The chicken was there. She stood there for a long moment with her hand on it and the ceiling above her ticking in the afternoon heat. She ate the chicken. She did not tell herself it meant anything. She ate it because she was hungry and it was there, and some stubbornness was not worth the physical cost. But she sat at the work table while she ate, and she thought about a man who watched who had eaten and who hadn't, and who left food on a shelf, and called it not spoken for, instead of calling it what it was, which was a gift that he'd understood she couldn't accept any other way. She thought about that for longer than she intended to. 3 days later, Silas Boone rode into the yard. Clara heard him before she saw him the particular way a man rides when he wants to be heard arriving too much speed on a property that isn't his. She stepped to the cookhouse door and watched him pull up near the main house and look around the yard with the proprietary sweep of a man taking inventory of something he considers already his. He was heavy-set, middle-aged, with the kind of confidence that came from 20 years of getting what he wanted because he had the money and patience to wait everyone else out. He had been buying land along the Eastern Crossing Range for 2 years piece by piece, and the word in town was that he had interest in the creek rights of every property within a mile of the Mercer South fence line. Wade came out to meet him. Clara watched the exchange too far to hear, but close enough to read in posture. Wade's posture said he was not pleased. Boone's posture said he didn't care. Then Boone looked at the cookhouse. He looked directly at Clara standing in the doorway, and he looked at her the way he'd looked at the yard like inventory. She stepped back inside. Cole came in from the South Range within the hour, and Clara heard the conversation through the thin cookhouse wall. Not the words, but the temperature of it, which ran hot from Boone's side, and cool and immovable from Cole's. It lasted 12 minutes. When Boone left, he left without whatever he'd come for, and the hoofbeats going out were faster than the hoofbeats coming in. Cole came to the cookhouse door 20 minutes later, with dust still on his jaw. He did not explain what the visit was about. He asked if there was coffee, and she poured him a cup, and he drank it standing at the counter and looked at the middle distance for a while. Then he said, "Boone's been after the water rights on my South Creek line for 3 seasons." Clara said nothing. She went back to the bread she was shaping. "He'll keep coming," Cole said. "He's patient." "Most men who want something they shouldn't have are," Clara said. Cole looked at her. A real look, not the measured, careful kind he'd been giving her across the cookhouse for 2 weeks. Something more direct. "He saw you in the doorway," he said. "I know. He'll ask in town who's running the cookhouse. He'll find out your situation." Clara's hands kept moving. My situation is that I'm employed and housed and feeding 14 ranch hands adequately. I don't see what he can do with that. He can use it, Cole said. Men like Boone use whatever's loose. He set the cup down. I'm telling you so. You're not surprised if he tries to approach you directly. If he approaches me directly, Clara said, I'll handle it. Cole looked at her for another moment. I don't doubt that, he said quietly. And something about the way he said it, simply without the edge of testing her, made her hands slow down briefly before she caught herself and kept working. That night, Ellie was already asleep when Clara sat at the small table in the cabin with the promissory note from the Glenwood Bank spread out in front of her. She had the figures she'd been carrying in her head since March laid out on a piece of paper, beside it the amount owed, the interest accruing, the number of months before the bank's patience would convert into action. She had thought when she took this position that $11 a month and provisions would give her enough breathing room to start chipping at the note by autumn. She ran the numbers again. It was going to be close. Dangerously close. And if anything went wrong, if Ellie got sick again, if the ranch season shortened, if the bank moved earlier than expected, there was no margin left for anything to go wrong. She folded the note and put it in her pocket and sat in the dark for a while and listened to her daughter breathe, and told herself the way she had told herself for 8 months that close was not the same as impossible. She was still telling herself that, when she heard it, quiet, quick, barely a sound at all, a scrape on the west side of the cabin near the window. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move. She took the fireplace poker from beside the small stove, crossed the floor in 3 silent steps, and pressed herself against the wall beside the window. She waited. 30 seconds. Nothing. She looked out. Nothing in the yard. A horse tied at the far rail, which was Denny's roan, which was always there when Denny was pulling night watch. The sound did not repeat. She stood there for another full minute before she moved away from the wall. She set the poker against the chair where she could reach it and sat back down at the table. It was probably nothing. A branch. An animal. The cabin settling in the heat. But she did not sleep well, and in the morning she checked the outside of the west wall and found in the dirt, just below the window, a boot print that did not belong to anyone from Mercer Ranch. She knew the boots on this property by now. She had been watching feet since the day she arrived, the way you watch everything when you are a woman alone, in a place that is not yet entirely safe. The print was wide, heavy, and pointed outward at an angle she recognized. She stood over it for a long time. Then she went inside and started the 5 o'clock biscuits and said nothing to anyone. But she moved the poker to the space between her cot and the wall, where her hand could find it in the dark. And when Cole came to the cookhouse at 6:30 and looked at her with that careful, reading the map expression, she met his eyes and gave him nothing. Because she did not yet know what she was dealing with, and she did not hand unknown things to people until she understood them, and Cole Mercer, for all his steady watching, and his food left on shelves, and his plain-spoken honesty, was still a man she had known for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks was not enough. 2 weeks was a beginning. But beginnings had burned her before. She poured his coffee and went back to the biscuits and kept her face level and her hands moving, and told herself, the way she always told herself, that she was fine, that she was managing, that she did not need anything she didn't already have. She almost believed it. She found out about the debt on a Wednesday. Not from Cole, not from Wade. She found out the way women on the frontier always found out things men decided they didn't need to know from a third party who assumed she already knew and said too much because of it. Mrs. Holloway ran the dry goods counter at the church exchange in town, and she was the kind of woman who had survived 40 years on the frontier by paying attention to everything and saying only what was useful. She was not a gossip. That was what made what she said matter. Clara had driven into Drywater Crossing on Wednesday morning to pick up the weekly supply order, and Mrs. Holloway had come out from behind the exchange counter to help her load the wagon, which she had never done before, and while they were lifting a flour sack together, the older woman said quietly, without looking at her. The bank note on your homestead. Cole Mercer paid the balance last month. Clara set down the flour sack. The whole balance, Miss said. She looked at Clara now, and her expression was not unkind. Hendricks at the bank mentioned it to my husband. He didn't mean for it to travel, but... She paused. I thought you should know, in case you didn't. Clara stood in the wagon bed and felt the specific quality of silence that comes when something you thought you understood has turned out to be a different shape entirely. How much? She said. I don't know the exact figure. Enough that Hendricks remembered it. Clara finished loading the wagon. She thanked Mrs. Holloway in a voice she did not recognize as entirely her own. She drove back to the ranch and she unloaded every supply crate with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had placed their feelings in a room and locked the door, and she got through the noon meal and the afternoon prep and the evening supper, and she said nothing to anyone, and she did not look at Cole, and she did not look at the ledger, and she told Ellie she had a headache and needed quiet. She waited until the cookhouse was empty and the hands had turned in. Then she walked to the main house and knocked. Cole opened the door and read her face in about 2 seconds and stepped back without a word to let her in. She came in and stood in the center of the front room and turned to face him. The bank note, she said. He didn't pretend. Yes. You paid it. Yes. When? 5 weeks ago, he said. Before you came to work here. I didn't want... He stopped. Started again. Boone had his lawyer asking questions about uncollected debts on properties near the South Creek line. Your note was one of 3 he was watching. If it had gone to default, he would have had a mechanism to pressure the bank into a forced sale at reduced value. I didn't want him to have that. Clara looked at him. You paid off my debt to block Silas Boone's land strategy. Partly. Partly. Cole held her gaze and did not flinch from it. The other part was because you were about to lose the only piece of land your daughter has a claim to, and that was wrong, and I had the means to stop it. The room was very quiet. You had no right, Clara said. Her voice was steady, and that steadiness cost her something. That note had my name on it, my signature, my debt. You made a decision about my property without my knowledge and without my consent, and then you offered me employment, and I came here not knowing that you had already made yourself a party to my financial situation without asking me whether I wanted that. That's true, Cole said. You own part of my life right now, and you didn't tell me. I don't own any part of your life. You paid my debt, Cole. It was the first time she had used his given name, and they both heard it. That's not nothing. In this territory, in this time, that is not nothing. People will say, I owe you. People will say that's why I'm here. People will say... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. Did you think I couldn't handle knowing? Did you decide I was too fragile to be told? No, he said, firm without hesitation. I thought you'd refuse. The honesty of it hit her harder than an excuse would have. You were right, she said. I would have refused. And Boone would have had the mechanism. That was my risk to take. And Ellie's, he said quietly. Clara's breath caught. She turned away from him and stood with her back to him for a moment and pressed both hands flat against the table edge, which was her reflex when she needed something solid, and there were no walls close enough. He had used Ellie, and he had used her correctly, and she hated him for it, with the specific, precise hatred of someone who cannot argue with the reasoning and can only argue with the method. I am not a property to be managed, she said. I know that. I am not a situation to be solved without my knowledge. I know that too. Then why? She turned back. Why didn't you tell me when I came here, when we agreed terms? You could have told me then. Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked like a man choosing between several true things, and not certain which one would do the least damage. Finally he said, Because you would have left, and I didn't want you to leave. The silence after that was different from the silence before it. Clara stood in it and felt something shift under her that she had been carefully, deliberately standing on top of for weeks. And the shifting frightened her, in a way the drought and the empty well and the boot print outside her window had not. Because those things were external dangers, and this was something that lived inside the walls she'd built to keep functioning, and she did not know what happened to her if those walls moved. "I need to think," she said. "All right. I'm going to go back to the cabin. I'm going to think. And tomorrow, you are going to tell me the exact figure you paid, and we are going to set a repayment schedule, and it is going to be at fair terms with no sentiment attached." "Clara, those are the terms," she said. "Take them, or I'll be gone by morning." He took them. She walked back to the cabin in the dark, and she sat on the edge of her cot, and she did not cry, because she had not cried since the week after Thomas died, and she had made a decision then that she was going to spend that particular energy on living instead. But she sat very still for a long time, and she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. He had paid her debt. He had done it to protect her from Boone, which was true. He had done it because he didn't want her to leave, which was also true. Both things occupied the same action, and she couldn't separate them, and that was the problem, because she needed them to be separate. She needed the practical thing to be practical, and the personal thing to be personal, and instead they were knotted together in a way she didn't have the tools to untangle at 11 o'clock at night with her daughter asleep 3 feet away. She went to sleep. She didn't sleep well. The next morning she ran the cookhouse the same as every other morning. She put the food out at 5. She refilled the cups. She did not look at Cole differently, and she did not look away from him either. She treated him with the same professional, measured attention she'd given him every morning for 4 weeks. And if that cost her something to maintain, she maintained it anyway, because the cookhouse was her territory, and she ran it on her terms. He came to her at the end of the morning, as she'd said, and he gave her the figure. It was larger than she'd feared, and smaller than she'd imagined, and she wrote it down, and they set a schedule, 7 months' payments drawn against her wages, and they both signed the paper, and it was done, and it was ugly and honest and correct. Neither of them spoke about the other thing he'd said. But it was in the room. It was in every room after that. And Clara worked around it the way you work around a piece of furniture that's been moved. You know where it is now, your body adjusts, but some part of your instinct keeps expecting the old arrangement. The grass fire started on a Thursday night. She smelled it before she heard it. She came awake from a light sleep, with the smoke already in the back of her throat, and sat up, and in the same motion she was on her feet, because she had been on the frontier long enough to know that smoke in the night was not something you identified slowly. She crossed to Ellie's cot and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Up," she said. "Now, don't ask." Ellie was up. She was her mother's daughter, and she had learned the tone that meant now. Outside, the sky to the south was wrong. Clara heard the horses before she heard the men. The particular escalating distress of animals that could smell what was coming and didn't understand why they weren't moving away from it. Then she heard Wade shouting across the yard, and the sound of boots hitting the porch of the bunkhouse, and the whole ranch coming awake at once. She told Ellie, "You stay in this cabin. You stay with the door latched. You do not come out until I come for you." "Mama?" "Ellie." She took her daughter's face in both hands. "I will come back for you, but you have to stay here. Promise me." Ellie promised. Clara latched the door behind her from the outside. The fire was on the south range, moving northeast with the wind, which meant it was moving toward the lower pasture, where 2 of the ranch's best breeding mares had been moved that afternoon to take advantage of the remaining grass near the creek. Clara knew this because she had watched the hands move them. She knew the layout of this ranch now, the way she knew the layout of her cookhouse completely instinctively, because she had made it her business to know. She went to find Wade and found Cole instead, coming hard from the stable with a wet bandana in his hand and his hat pulled low. "The mares," she said immediately. "They're in the lower pasture." He stopped. "How do you—" "Denny moved them this afternoon. I watched from the cookhouse window. The lower pasture gate is east-facing and the fire's coming northeast. They'll run into the fence line. Cole looked at her for exactly 1 second. Wade's taking the men to the fire break on the south side. I'm going for the mares. I know, she said. He looked at her again, look. Then he was past her and running. She went after him. She heard him say her name sharply from somewhere ahead of her, meaning, go back, meaning stay, and she did not slow down because she had just latched her daughter in a cabin, and the only way that was acceptable was if she was out here doing something that mattered, and she was not going to stand in the yard while the ranch that was keeping Ellie safe burned. The lower pasture gate was already rattling when they reached it, the mares pressing against the fence in their panic, and the smoke was thick enough that Clara's eyes were streaming before she'd gotten the latch up. Cole got the gate open, and the first mare came through like water gone before you could track her. The second one stopped. She was 3 years old, the younger of the two, and she had caught her halter rope on the fence post in her panic, and was pulling against it in a way that was going to break something, the rope, the post, or her own neck. Clara went to her head. Hey, she said, low, steady, the same voice she used with Ellie. Hey, I've got you. Stop. The mare did not stop. Stop, Clara said again, and she got both hands on the halter, and she held on while the animal threw her weight sideways, and Clara went with it instead of against it, because she had watched Denny work horses for 4 weeks, and she had paid attention the same way she paid attention to everything, and she knew that fighting a frightened horse was the fastest way to lose. Cole was at the fence post working the rope free with his knife. The smoke was closer now. Clara could feel the heat on the back of her neck, and she kept her eyes on the mare's eyes, and she kept talking low and even, because the voice was the only thing she had, and she was going to use it. The rope came free. The mare lurched. Clara went with her, holding the halter, until they were through the gate, and then she let her go, and the mare ran, and they both ran the other direction, and she heard the fence line catch behind them, a sound like the world being unmade, one board at a time. She did not realize her hands were burned until she was already 30 feet from the fence. The pain arrived then, sudden and complete, and she stopped and looked down and saw the rope burns across both palms, where she'd held on, and her hands were shaking, and she couldn't tell if that was the pain or the adrenaline or both. Cole saw it at the same moment she did. He crossed to her in 3 steps and took both her wrists, not her hands because he could see the damage, and he looked at her palms, and his jaw went tight in the way it went tight when he was controlling something he didn't want to show. Can you walk? He said. I'm already standing. That's not the same question. Yes, she said. I can walk. They walked. Back at the yard, the scene had the controlled chaos of a crisis being managed by men who had done this before. The fire break was holding. 3 of the hands were injured, none seriously. Fencing was gone along the south line. The cattle count was incomplete and wouldn't be accurate until morning. Wade moved through it all with his characteristic efficiency, directing, assessing, cataloging damage with the flat precision of a man who had seen this before and knew the shape of it. Silas Boone arrived at midnight. Clara was sitting on the cookhouse step with her hands wrapped in clean cloth from the supply cabinet, and she heard the hoofbeats and looked up and recognized him even in the dark by the way he sat. His horse like a man arriving to assess a deal rather than a neighbor arriving to help. He rode into the yard and surveyed the damage, and he said to Cole, loud enough for the yard to hear, "Rough night, lose much." "Some fencing," Cole said. His voice was absolutely flat. "South line?" "Yes." Boone nodded slowly. "South line's been weak for a while. Dry conditions." He looked at the burned range beyond the fence. "Hard to maintain these operations when the land's working against you." "The land's not working against me," Cole said. "No." Boone looked at him. "Creek's running low. Grazing's gone on the south pasture. And now this." He paused. "I made you an offer on those water rights last month. That offer stands." "And my answer stands," Cole said. Boone looked around the yard. His eyes landed on Clara on the cookhouse step and stayed there for a moment, and it was a different kind of looking than the looking Cole did. It was the looking of a man reading a vulnerability rather than a person. "You've got expenses now," Boone said, turning back to Cole. "Recovery costs, fencing lost cattle grazing damage. Be practical about it." "I'm always practical," Cole said. "Good night, Silas." Boone left. His hoofbeats going out had the same quality they'd had the last time, not quite the sound of a man who was done. Wade watched him go and then looked at Clara and said too quietly for anyone else to hear, "The cut fence line on the south end. Found it before the fire. Clean cut, not a break." Clara looked at him. "I told Cole," Wade said. She looked at the direction Boone had ridden and said nothing. Then, because she had been holding something back since the moment she'd walked back from the pasture with burned hands and a trembling that she would not allow to become visible, and because Wade was one of the few people on this ranch whose judgment she trusted completely, she said, "The boot print outside my cabin window. 3 weeks ago. I didn't mention it." Wade's expression did not change. "Size? Large, wide toe, pointed outward." Wade nodded once. "I'll look at it in the morning." He moved away. Clara sat back on the step and looked at her wrapped hands and thought about a fence line that had been cut clean and a man who'd arrived at midnight to inspect damage he may have already known was there. And she thought about Ellie behind a latched door in a cabin with a window that faced west. And the specific quality of cold that moved through her then had nothing to do with the night temperature. She was still sitting there when Cole came to the cookhouse step and sat down beside her without asking. He didn't say anything for a moment. She didn't either. "The mares," he said finally. "They're both clear," she said. "I heard them in the upper corral when we came back." "I know." He looked at her hands. "Let me see. They're fine." "Clara." She held out her hands. He unwrapped the cloth and looked at the burns, and she watched his face while he looked, because his face told her things he hadn't said yet. What it told her now was that he was angry, not at her, not at the fire, but at the specific fact of her pain, the way you're angry at something you feel responsible for, even when logic says you're not. "You should have gone back to the cabin," he said. "The mares would have broken through the fence. I would have managed it." "With what hands?" she said. "Every hand you had was on the fire break. You would have had to choose between the south line and the mares, and you know which one you would have chosen." He was quiet. "I made the better choice," she said. "The one with the most value. That's what I was hired to do." "You were hired to cook," he said. "I was hired because I could run this operation better than it was being run," she said. "And tonight, that meant the mares." She took her hands back and began rewrapping them. "Don't make me feel bad for being useful." He said her name, just her name the way he'd said it once before, and she stopped. "I'm not making you feel bad," he said. "I'm trying to—" He stopped. Something worked in his jaw. "I saw you go into that pasture. I knew what you were doing, and I knew I couldn't stop you, and I didn't—" He stopped again. "I didn't like how that felt." Clara looked at him in the dark with her burned hands in her lap. "Because I was a liability," she said. "No," he said. "Because you weren't." The silence stretched between them and changed shape. "I've been thinking about what you said," Clara said carefully. "When I found out about the note, you said you didn't want me to leave." "I meant it." "I know you meant it," she said. "That's not simpler. That's more complicated." Cole looked at her. "I know." "I have a child," she said, "and a debt that's now owed to you, and a property that you kept from being taken. And I'm sitting on your cookhouse step with burned hands because I went into a burning field to save your horses. None of that is simple. None of that is—" She stopped. Her voice had changed slightly, and she caught it and corrected it. "None of that is a place where feelings are uncomplicated." "No," he said. "So I need you to understand something." She looked at him directly. "Whatever this is, Whatever has been building in this space between us, I will not sort through it while I am in debt to you. I will not feel something and not know if I'm feeling it freely or feeling it because I'm obligated. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, said. And then, I'd wait. How long? However long it takes you to decide you're standing on your own ground, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her hands. Then she looked at the dark space where Silas Boone had ridden out and thought about cut fence lines and boot prints and a man patient enough to buy one piece of land at a time until he had everything he'd ever wanted. Don't wait too quietly, she said. Boone's going to move before the season's out. Cole's eyes sharpened. What do you know? Wade told me about the fence line tonight, she said. And I'm telling you about the boot print outside my cabin 3 weeks ago that I should have told you about sooner. She paused. I should have told you sooner. He went very still. My error, she said. I was managing it myself. That was the wrong call. The look on his face was not anger. It was something harder to name than anger. It was the expression of a man who has just understood the full weight of something and is deciding how to carry it. I'll put a second man on the night watch, he said. Starting tonight. Good, she said. She got up. Her hands hurt, and her back hurt. And somewhere under the burned palms and the smoke in her hair and the cold calculation about Boone's next move, there was something quiet and frightened that had been there since Thomas died and had not yet found a reason to stop. She looked at Cole one more time. Good night, she said. Good night, he said. She went to the cabin. She unlatched the door, and Ellie was sitting up in the dark exactly where she'd told her to wait, and she crossed the floor and pulled her daughter against her and held on. And Ellie held back without asking any of the questions that Clara could feel waiting, because Ellie was her daughter, and she understood at 6 years old the difference between questions that helped and questions that could wait. They sat like that for a while. Outside, the smoke was thinning. The fire break had held. The mares were safe. The fence was gone. Boone would come back. And Cole Mercer was sitting on the cookhouse step in the dark saying he would wait, and Clara did not know what to do with a man who said that and meant it, because no one had ever said it to her before, and she was not yet sure if she was strong enough to believe it. But she was still standing, and for tonight, that was enough. The morning after the fire, Wade found 3 more cut sections along the south fence line. He brought the information to Cole at breakfast, quietly standing at the end of the table with his hat in his hand, and Clara heard it from the cookhouse counter, where she was slicing bread with her bandaged hands, moving carefully, not letting the pain change her pace. She heard Wade's voice drop the way it dropped when the news was worse than the telling of it, and she heard Cole go very still in the way he went still when something he'd suspected had just been confirmed. She refilled the breadbasket. She brought it to the table. She did not look at either of them with any expression that said she was listening, because some information was more useful when the people sharing it forgot you were in the room. 3 sections, Cole said. Clean cuts, Wade said. All on the east side of the south line. Whoever did it knew where the patrol gaps were. Boone's men know this property. Yes. Cole said nothing for a moment. Can we prove it? Not yet. Clara set the breadbasket down and went back to the counter and said, without turning around, The land agent's office in Glenwood. Does Boone have a filed claim on any property adjacent to the South Creek line? Both men looked at her. I don't know, Cole said. Find out, she said. If he's filed a speculative claim in anticipation of acquiring your water rights, that's a document trail. That's something a territorial judge can look at. Wade looked at Cole. Cole looked at Clara's back. How do you know about speculative filings? Cole said. My husband spent 8 months fighting one before he died, she said. She turned around. The man who filed it lost eventually, but Thomas spent 8 months and most of our savings on it, and the stress of it didn't help his health. She held Cole's gaze. Get someone to the land office. Today if possible. Cole nodded once. Wade. Wade was already moving. The second thing that happened that morning was that Russ came in from the east pasture with news that 2 of the cattle they'd thought were lost in the fire hadn't burned, they'd been driven. Tracks heading east toward Boone's Range cut across the scorched grass in a line that was too deliberate to be a panic scatter. Clara heard this from the cabin, where she had taken Ellie to change her bandages before the mid-morning. She heard Russ's voice in the yard, and she heard Cole's response, and she heard the word driven, and she sat on the edge of the cot and pressed her wrapped hands together in her lap and understood that this had moved past a property dispute into something with criminal weight. "Mama," Ellie said. She was watching her mother's face with the attention she'd been giving it since the night of the fire, the vigilant watching of a child who understands that the adult in the room is managing something serious and is trying to read how serious. "What's happening?" "Ranch business," Clara said. "Bad ranch business." "Some of it, yes." "Is Mr. Mercer going to be okay?" Clara looked at her daughter. "Why?" "Because he looks tired," Ellie said. "He's been tired since the fire. Like how you look tired when you're also worried, but you don't want to say so." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He'll be okay," she said. "That's what people like him do. They figure it out." "People like you too," Ellie said simply. Clara tied off the last bandage. "Come help me with the noon meal." The noon meal was the busiest it had been since she'd arrived. Extra hands had come in from 2 neighboring properties to help with the fence repair, men who'd heard about the fire and come the way people came in hard years because you helped your neighbor and hoped they'd remember it when it was your turn. Clara fed 14 of her own hands and 9 more besides, and she did it without running short on anything because she had built the supply system with exactly this kind of contingency in mind. And when the last plate went out and the last cup was filled, she felt the particular satisfaction of a thing done correctly under pressure. Mrs. Holloway arrived in the afternoon with 2 other women from the church. Exchange, a younger woman named Sadie and an older one whose name Clara didn't catch, and they came with canned goods and cloth for bandaging, and the kind of practical solidarity that frontier women extended to each other across whatever social distances the men in their lives maintained. They did not make a ceremony of it. They set the goods on the cookhouse counter, asked Clara what else was needed, and when she gave them a list, they wrote it down and said they'd have it by Friday. "The town is talking," Mrs. Holloway said, while Sadie and the other woman were loading the empties back onto the wagon. "I imagine so," Clara said. "Some of it's useful talk. People are asking questions about the fence and the fire." Mrs. Holloway looked at her directly. "Some of it's less useful. About you." "What kind?" "The kind women get when they're working close to a man without a husband." Mrs. Holloway's voice was neither apologetic nor delicate. She stated it the way she stated everything as a fact that deserved to be looked at plainly. "I'm telling you because you should hear it from someone who's not saying it to harm you." Clara kept her hands moving on the counter. "What are they saying?" "That you moved in fast, that the employment is convenient, that Cole Mercer is a man with a ranch, and a woman in his cookhouse, and a child on his property, and that the arrangement is—" She paused. "Assumed." "Assumed." "Yes." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Have you heard anyone say my work isn't good?" "No," Mrs. Holloway said. "Have you heard anyone say the cookhouse isn't running well, that the hands aren't fed, that the supply operation isn't managed correctly?" "No." "Then what they're assuming," Clara said, "is about what they expect of a woman in my position, not about what I've actually done." She looked at Mrs. Holloway. "I can't control expectation. I can control performance. I've done that." Mrs. Holloway studied her for a long moment. Then she said something that Clara did not expect. "You're right. And I want you to know that there are women in this town who see that clearly. You're not as alone in this as the loudest voices want you to feel." She left. Clara stood in the empty cookhouse for a moment and let that sit. She was not as alone as the loudest voices wanted her to feel. She filed that away. It mattered. The twist came on Friday, and it came through the land office in Glenwood, exactly as Clara had predicted it would. Wade came back from the territorial land office with a document that he put in Cole's hands at 5 in the afternoon, and Cole read it at the cookhouse table, with Clara standing at the counter and Wade standing at the door. Expression on Cole's face. When he finished reading it was the expression of a man who had just confirmed the full architecture of something he'd only seen pieces of until now. He turned the document around and put it in front of Clara. She read it. Silas Boone had filed a speculative interest claim on 3 adjacent properties 6 months ago. One of them was the Bennett homestead. The claim had been filed under a provision that allowed a creditor's agent to register interest in land tied to an unresolved debt, a provision that was legal but narrow, and which required the debt to remain active at the time of the dispute. Cole had paid the Bennett note 5 weeks ago, which meant the claim on the Bennett homestead was now void. But the other 2 properties weren't, and one of them shared the southern boundary with Mercer Ranch. "He's not just after your water rights," Clara said. "No," Cole said. "He's building a land corridor. If he gets the 2 adjacent properties, he controls the access point to the creek on the eastern approach. He wouldn't need your water rights directly. He'd have the surrounding leverage." Wade said, "Can we fight the remaining claims?" "The owners of those properties need to know," Clara said. "Do you know who they are?" "Peterson's family," Cole said. "And the Abel widow." He stopped. "Ruth Abel. She sold to the Denver wig trader in April." Clara looked at him. "I know who she is. She left the territory in June. I don't know where." "Mrs. Holloway might," Clara said. She was already untying her apron. "The church exchange keeps correspondence addresses for families who relocate. It's how they forward the school donations." She looked at Cole. "I need to go to town." "I'll come with you," he said. "You don't." "Clara." He said it plainly. "Boone's man was outside your cabin window. You're not going to town alone." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she put the apron on the hook and picked up her coat. They went together. Mrs. Holloway had Ruth Abel's address in Salida. She produced it from the exchange ledger within 4 minutes of being asked, and she asked no questions about why, which was one of the things Clara had come to value about her absolutely. Cole wrote down the address, and Mrs. Holloway added the name of a solicitor in Glenwood who had handled the Abel property sale and would likely still have the relevant documents. Standing in the church exchange doorway on the way out, with the late afternoon sun cutting hard across the street, Silas Boone's wagon came around the corner and stopped. He saw them before they saw him. Clara knew because she watched his expression when she looked up, and it was the expression of a man who had been caught calculating something and did not have quite enough time to replace it with something neutral. He got down from the wagon. He walked toward them with his hat in his hand, which was the posture of a man who wanted to appear reasonable, and he said to Cole, "Didn't expect to see you in town today." "Things change," Cole said. Boone looked at Clara. "Mrs. Bennett, how are your hands healing?" "Well enough," she said. "Nasty business afire." He shook his head slowly. "Property damage, lost stock, fencing costs. Adds up fast." He looked back at Cole. "My offer on the water rights is still a fair one, given everything." "Given everything," Cole said. "My answer is still no." Boone's expression did not change, but something behind it did. "You've got obligations now, Cole. Staff a child on the property recovery costs from the fire. A man with those kinds of responsibilities is more interested in protecting what he has than selling it," Cole said. "We done here, Silas?" Boone looked at Clara again. This time the look was longer, and it said something specific. It said that he had information she didn't or believed he did, and he was deciding whether to use it now or save it. He saved it. He put his hat back on, and he walked back to his wagon, and he left, and Clara watched him go, and thought he knows we went to the land office. Someone told him. He has someone in this town who tells him things. She said this to Cole on the road back to the ranch. Cole's jaw worked. "Harper," he said. "Harper sees everything that comes into town, and he talks to Boone's men. Then whatever legal steps we take next need to go through Glenwood directly. Clara said. Not through anyone local. Cole looked at her sideways. When did you become a land strategy advisor? When Boone put a boot print outside my daughter's window, she said. Cole looked at the road ahead and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'm going to Glenwood Monday, to the solicitor and the land office both. Take the speculative claim document, she said, and the record of the paid note. If you can establish that Boone's agent knew the note was in default risk before it was cleared and filed the claim in bad faith. That's fraud, Cole said. That's at minimum an arguable case, Clara said. I'm not a lawyer, but I lived through Thomas's land fight long enough to know what makes a judge look twice. Cole was quiet. Then he said, "Come with me." Clara looked at him. "To Glenwood," he said. "Monday. You know this case better than anyone because you lived a version of it. The solicitor needs to understand what Boone is building and why. You can explain it better than I can." She thought about it for exactly as long as it took the wagon to cover 30 yards of road. "I'll need someone to watch Ellie." "Mrs. Holloway," Cole said. "I'll ask tonight. And I'll need to prep the noon meal before we leave so the cookhouse isn't short." "Of course. And this doesn't change the repayment schedule," she said. "I'm going as someone with relevant knowledge, not as anything else." "I know that," he said. She looked at him. He was watching the road with that steady forward expression he wore when he was committed to something, and she thought about a man who said I'd wait and meant it, and she thought about what it cost her to keep insisting on the distance between them when the distance kept shrinking on its own. She didn't say any of that. She looked at the road and said, "All right, Monday." Monday came with a sky the color of hammered copper, and they left at first light with Ellie settled at Mrs. Holloway's kitchen table eating cornbread and already asking questions about the exchange's ledger system, which Mrs. Holloway seemed to find charming rather than exhausting. The solicitor in Glenwood was a thin, precise man named Aldrich who listened without interrupting and read the documents Clara had organized in order before the meeting with an expression that moved from professional neutrality to genuine interest over the course of 12 minutes. When he finished reading, he looked at Clara. "You organized these?" "Yes. In this order specifically. The speculative filing date relative to the debt status date is the key sequence," she said. "If the filing predates the formal default notice by more than 60 days, there may be a question about whether the agent filed in anticipation of a default he helped engineer." Aldrich looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Cole. Then he looked back at Clara. "Mrs. Bennett, are you in the legal profession?" "I'm a cookhouse manager," she said. "She managed her late husband's land dispute for 8 months, Cole said. "Thomas Bennett," Clara said. "Glenwood Market Area, 1874. You may have records." Aldrich turned to his files. He had records. He spent 4 minutes reading them, and then he put them down and looked at Clara with an expression that was not quite respect and not quite surprise, but lived between the two. "The agent in that case," he said, "was a man named Croft." "Yes," Clara said. "Croft works for Boone now," Aldrich said. The room went very quiet. Cole said, "Are you certain?" "He's been on Boone's payroll since 1876, Aldrich said. He looked at the speculative filing again. "And his signature is on this document." He set it down carefully. "Mrs. Bennett, the same agent who filed a speculative claim against your late husband's property has now filed one against your current property and against the property adjacent to Mercer Ranch." Clara kept her face level. "That's a pattern." "It is," Aldrich said. "And patterns are things territorial judges find interesting." The ride back from Glenwood was longer in feel than in distance. Clara sat with her hands in her lap and watched the road and turned the information over and over in her mind, fitting the pieces into the shape they made, and the shape they made was ugly and deliberate and had been in motion for years. Thomas's land fight hadn't been random. It had been early. It had been Boone or Boone's money testing a method that Croft would refine and use again on the next property and the next and the one after that. Thomas had fought it for 8 months, and it had worn him down. Clara did not allow herself to stay in that thought for long because some thoughts were too large to sit inside on a wagon road with no walls around you. Cole said after a long silence, "Are you all right?" "Thinking," she said. "About Thomas?" She looked at him. He held her gaze steadily. "About the pattern," she said. "And what it means that Croft filed against my homestead. It means I was always part of this. Before I came to work for you. Before the fire. Before any of it." She paused. Boone looked at this territory, and he mapped it, and I was on the map. "You're not on it alone anymore," Cole said. She looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light was cutting sideways across his face, and he looked tired and determined, and more honest than was comfortable to look at directly. "I know," she said, quietly. Something shifted between them in the wagon, not dramatically, not with any of the ceremony that such shifts were supposed to have according to stories. Just a quiet mutual acknowledgement, the kind that happens when two people who have been circling something finally stop pretending the thing isn't there. Neither of them spoke about it. They rode the rest of the way in silence that was different from the silence before, and when they got back to the ranch, and Ellie came running across the yard with flour on her apron, because Mrs. Holloway had apparently let her help with biscuits, Cole caught her without thinking and lifted her out of her own momentum and set her down with the ease of a man who had been doing this for longer than he had, and Ellie laughed and didn't question it for a second. Clara stood and watched this and felt something open in her chest that she had been keeping closed with both hands for 8 months. She let it open, just a little, just enough to breathe through. That evening after supper, after the hands turned in, and Ellie was asleep and the cookhouse was quiet, Clara sat at the work table and laid out every document in front of her and wrote a summary in her clean, precise hand, the sequence of Croft's filings, the dates, the properties, the connection to Boone, the method. She wrote it as if she were explaining it to someone who had never heard any of it because a territorial judge hadn't, and the explanation needed to be plain and irrefutable and complete. She was on the 3rd page when she heard the cookhouse door. Cole came in and looked at what she was doing and sat down across from her without a word and pulled the 2nd page toward him and read it. "This is good," he said. "It's not finished." "I know, it's still good." He set it down. He looked at her. "Clara, I need to say something, and I need to say it while we're still in the middle of all this before it's resolved, because I don't want you to think I'm only saying it when everything is safe and settled." She put down her pen. "I don't want you to leave at the end of the season," he said. "Not as an employee, not as—" He stopped, restarted. "I want to ask you something that I don't have a right to ask yet, and I know that, and I'm going to ask it anyway, because not asking it is starting to feel like its own kind of dishonesty." Cole. "I know about the debt," he said. "I know about the repayment schedule. I know you don't want to feel obligated. I know all of it, and I'm asking anyway." "Stop," she said. He stopped. She looked at him across the work table with the documents between them and the lantern light going warm and steady over everything, and she said, "I'm not done yet." He waited. "I'm not done with the repayment," she said. "I'm not done with the legal case. I'm not done deciding what my homestead is worth and what I do with it, and I am not—" She pressed both hands flat on the table, her reflex, her anchor. "I am not going to answer a question like that while any of those things are unfinished, because I told you why and the reason hasn't changed." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight." "Then what are you asking for?" He was quiet for a moment. "Permission to keep asking, eventually." Clara looked at him. At the careful, steady way he held himself. At the honesty he put in front of her, like a thing he was willing to have refused. She picked up her pen. "You already have that," she said. And she went back to the document, and he sat across from her in the lamplight and did not leave, and they worked in the same silence for another hour, and it was the most peaceful Clara Bennett had felt since before the well ran dry. She was still afraid. She was still in debt. Boone was still out there, patient and deliberate, and the legal case was 3 months from resolution at minimum, and the season would end, and she would have to make decisions she wasn't ready to make yet. But the man across the table wasn't going anywhere, and neither, she realized with a steadiness that surprised her, was she. Aldrich filed the formal complaint against Croft with the Territorial Land Office on the last Wednesday of August, and by Thursday morning the news had reached Drywater Crossing, the way all news reached small towns, through 3 different mouths, each version slightly different, but the core of it the same. Silas Boone's land agent had been named in a fraudulent filing complaint spanning 4 properties across 2 counties, and there was a territorial judge coming from Denver to hear it. Clara found out from Wade, who found out from the feed merchant, who had heard it from the postmaster. She was rolling dough when Wade came to the cookhouse door, and she set down the rolling pin and listened without expression and said, "When is the judge expected?" 3 weeks, Wade said. "Maybe 4. Ann Boone rode out this morning," Wade said. "Early. His foreman said he went to Glenwood." "To his lawyer," Clara said. "Most likely." She picked up the rolling pin. "Thank you, Wade." He left. She went back to the dough and worked it steadily and thought about 3 weeks and what Boone would do with 3 weeks and a lawyer in Glenwood and the knowledge that his method had finally been named out loud in a legal document. Men like Boone did not go quiet when they were cornered. They moved faster. She was right about that within 48 hours. The note arrived at the ranch on Friday afternoon, delivered not by post, but by a boy of about 12 who came to the cookhouse door and held it out and said he'd been paid a dime to bring it and didn't know who gave it to him, which was the kind of answer that was either true or so well rehearsed it amounted to the same problem. Clara took the note and the boy left, and she read it standing at the cookhouse counter. It was not signed. It said in plain printed letters, "The Bennett homestead note was paid by Cole Mercer before the woman arrived. The town should know what she's paying him back with." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it precisely in thirds and put it in her apron pocket and finished the afternoon prep and served supper at 6:30 and did not mention it to anyone until the cookhouse was empty and Cole came to return the sugar measure he'd borrowed that morning for some reason she'd already forgotten. She put the note on the table in front of him. He read it. His jaw went the way it went. He set it down. "Boone," he said. "Or Croft," she said. "Or someone they paid. I'll take this to Aldrich." "It won't be enough on its own," she said. "Anonymous notes aren't evidence, but it tells us something." She sat down across from him. "He's trying to move the fight from the land office to the town. If he can make the people here believe the worst about me, he creates pressure on you. Social pressure. The kind that makes a man's position in a community uncomfortable enough that selling starts to look like relief." Cole looked at her. "You think he'd rather break the case here than fight it in Glenwood?" "I think he's been building this territory piece by piece for years because he understands that legal fights are slow and community opinion is fast," she said. "He's not wrong about that. It's a sound strategy." "Against someone who cares what the town thinks," Cole said. "Everyone cares what the town thinks," Clara said. "People who say they don't are usually the ones who care most." She looked at the folded note. "He's counting on me to be ashamed, to go quiet, to let the story he's writing become the only one people hear." Cole was watching her. "What are you going to do?" Clara looked up at him. "I'm going to go to town tomorrow morning. I'm going to go to the church exchange, and I'm going to talk to Mrs. Holloway and Sadie, and whoever else is there, and I'm going to tell them plainly what happened. The note, the debt, the repayment schedule, all of it." She paused. "People gossip about what they don't know. You give them the true version first clearly without apology, and you take the weapon out of Boone's hand." Cole said nothing for a moment. "Then, that'll cost you something." "It'll cost me less than silence," she said. She went to town the next morning alone. She had told Cole she was going alone, and he had looked like a man with several objections, and she had looked at him until the objections went back down, because this was hers to do, and she needed to do it herself, or it would mean less. Mrs. Holloway was opening the exchange when Clara arrived. Sadie was there. Two other women came in within the first 10 minutes, drawn by some social current that Clara had learned to recognize, the kind that moved through a small town when something worth knowing was ahead. She told them. Standing at the exchange counter, with her hands flat on the wood, her anchor, her habit, she told them about the banknote and Cole's payment and the repayment schedule and the anonymous letter and Silas Boone's pattern across 4 properties and the name Croft, and what a fraudulent speculative filing meant for every widow and every struggling family in this territory who had ever fallen behind on a debt. She did not make herself the hero of it. She did not make Cole the hero of it. She made Boone the architect of it clearly and specifically, and with dates and document references, because she had spent 2 months organizing information and she knew how to present it. When she finished, the exchange was quiet. Sadie said, "Croft filed against the Peterson family too." "Yes," Clara said. "In March." Sadie looked at Mrs. Holloway. "My cousin married into the Peterson family." "Then your cousin needs to know," Clara said. Mrs. Holloway had been watching Clara throughout, with an expression that was measuring something internal that Clara couldn't see. Now she said, "The anonymous letter. You still have it?" "Yes." "Give it to Aldrich and give a copy to the church records," Mrs. Holloway said. "I'll witness the copy. If Boone tries the same thing again, there's a record of the first attempt." She looked at the other women. "And I think we should put together a written account of what we know about the Abel property sale. Ruth Abel left this territory because she felt she had no other option. That's relevant." Sadie was already reaching for paper. Clara stood in the exchange and watched these women move with the quick, practical efficiency of people who had been useful to each other across hard years. And she felt something she had not expected to feel standing in a room in Drywater Crossing. She felt the specific warmth of not being alone in a fight. And it was different from being rescued, entirely different. Because these women weren't carrying her. They were standing beside her. That was a different thing. She drove back to the ranch with the morning already burning toward noon, and the first person she saw in the yard was Ellie sitting on the top rail of the corral fence again. Clara pulled the wagon to a stop and looked at her daughter, who looked back with the expression of a child who is committed to a position and is prepared to defend it. "I'm not going to fall," Ellie said. "I know you're not," Clara said. "Come down anyway." Denny said, "Ellie." Ellie came down. She walked to the wagon with her chin up, which was a posture Clara recognized from her own mirror. "Mr. Mercer said I could learn," Ellie said. "He said if you agreed he'd teach me how to read the horses. Not ride yet, just read them." Clara looked at her daughter. Then she looked toward the stable where Cole had apparently made this offer to a 6-year-old without thinking to mention it to the child's mother first, which was a conversation they would be having. "We'll discuss it," Clara said. Ellie accepted this as better than no, which it was. The twist that broke the legal case open came not from Glenwood, but from Salida, and it came in the form of a letter from Ruth Abel. Aldrich had written to her at the address Mrs. Holloway provided, explaining the situation plainly and asking if she would be willing to provide a written account of the circumstances of her property sale. Ruth Abel wrote back in 11 days, which meant she had started writing within a day of receiving the letter, and the account she sent was 12 pages long, detailed, dated, and included 2 documents she had retained from the sale process that showed Croft's involvement in pressuring her to accept a below-market price by misrepresenting the status of a competing offer. Aldrich sent a summary to Cole by express post. Cole brought it to the cookhouse. Clara read it at the work table while Cole stood at the counter, and the afternoon heat pressed against the cookhouse walls, and neither of them said anything for the full 7 minutes it took her to read it twice. "He manufactured the competing offer," she said. "Yes." He told Ruth Abel there was another buyer prepared to pay more for the creek-adjacent parcel, which lowered her leverage, which is why she accepted what she accepted. Clara set the letter down. "And the other buyer was Boone." "Boone offering against himself," Cole said, "through a front." Through Croft, Clara said. Croft was both the agent advising the seller and the representative of the competing buyer. That's not just fraud, that's conspiracy to defraud. Cole was looking at her with an expression she had seen before, the one that lived between admiration and something more personal that he was managing carefully. Aldrich will have enough, she said. He already said so, Cole said. He filed the expanded complaint this morning. The territorial judge has the full documentation package. He paused. It's over for Boone Clara. Not immediately. Not without a fight. But the mechanism he's been using is broken. She sat with that for a moment. Let it settle. Thomas, she said. Just the name, quietly. Cole didn't say anything. He understood what she meant, that Thomas had fought a version of this for 8 months, and never gotten this far, and the reason he hadn't wasn't that he wasn't smart enough or strong enough. It was that he'd been alone, and without the documentation, and without the network that could find a Ruth Abel in Salida who kept her paperwork. He would have gotten there, she said, given time. Yes, Cole said. He would have. She looked at the letter. Then she stood up and she went to the window, and she pressed one hand flat against the frame, and she let herself feel it. Not grief exactly, not anymore, but the specific weight of a thing that should have been different and wasn't, and the strange, complicated gratitude of being the person who got to finish what someone else started. She did not cry, but she stood there for a long time, and Cole did not tell her to stop or move or come back to the table. He waited the way he had promised to wait, and he was quiet, and she was grateful for the quiet. When she turned back, she said, I want to talk about the homestead. Cole nodded. The repayment schedule ends in 6 weeks, she said. When it does, the property is mine clear. No liens, no claims, no Croft. She looked at him steadily. I've been thinking about what to do with it. All right. It's good land, she said. The creek access on the west edge is worth something, and there's a structure still standing that could be made into a usable outbuilding. I've been thinking about what Thomas and I always talked about breeding stock. The 2 mares from the fire, they're good animals. The right program managed correctly. Clara. He said it gently, but he said it clearly. Are you proposing a business arrangement? I'm exploring options, she said, out loud, to me. You're a rancher with capital and operational capacity, she said. I'm a person with land agricultural knowledge and a demonstrated ability to run an operation correctly. It is not unreasonable. Clara. He crossed the cookhouse in 4 steps and stopped at the correct distance, close enough to be heard at a lower volume, not so close that she couldn't look at him without looking up. I said I'd wait. I have waited. The debt is nearly clear. The legal case is broken open, and you are standing in my cookhouse talking about breeding stock and business arrangements when we both know that is not the primary question. She looked at him. Her hands were at her sides, and she was not reaching for a counter or a wall. What is the primary question? She said. Whether you'll stay, he said. Not as an employee, not as a business partner. Whether you'll stay as the person who moved the salt barrel on her first day and went into a burning field to save my horses, and organized a legal case over my kitchen table and held this ranch together in the worst season I've had in 6 years. He looked at her without the careful management he usually applied to looking at her. Whether you'll stay as yourself, with me. The cookhouse was very quiet. I have a child, she said. I know. Ellie is part of this. She comes with me everywhere I go. I know that too, he said. I taught her to read a horse's ears this morning. She already understands the left one means more than the right one. She's got a better eye than most of the hands. Something broke open in Clara's chest quietly without drama, the way a dam goes when the water has been patient enough, when the pressure has simply exceeded what even the best-built walls can hold. She told you that you looked tired, Clara said. What? After the fire. She told me you looked tired, like how I look when I'm worried, but don't want to say so. Clara looked at him. She's been watching you the same way she watches me. She reads people. She learned that from surviving the year we just survived. She paused. A child who reads people that carefully doesn't give that attention to someone she's indifferent to. Cole was very still. I'm not saying yes today, Clara said. I need to finish the repayment. I need to stand on ground that is unambiguously mine to make a decision like this. But I'm telling you. She stopped, steadied. I'm telling you that I see you. Not what you've done for me. Not the debt or the horses or the legal documents. You. The man who put my hair back in the bag and told me honestly about the last person who quit and made sure I ate the chicken because he knew I wouldn't take it any other way. Her voice had gone quieter than she intended, and she let it stay there. I see that man, and I am not afraid of him. Cole said her name, and it sounded different than every other time he'd said it, like something that had been waiting to be said correctly, and had finally found the right moment. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks, he agreed. She went back to the bread. He stayed in the cookhouse for another hour, sitting at the work table reading through the Aldrich correspondence and asking her questions about the document sequence that she answered while she worked. And it was ordinary, and it was easy, and it was the most honest afternoon she'd had in longer than she could name. The 6 weeks passed, the way hard-working time always passed fast in the living of it, full in the looking back. The legal hearing in Glenwood lasted 2 days. Clara attended the second day, the day when Croft's dual-role fraud was presented with Ruth Abel's documentation as evidence, and she sat in the gallery beside Mrs. Holloway and Sadie and 2 Peterson family members, and she listened to a territorial judge use the word conspiracy without hesitation and without qualification. Boone was fined. Croft lost his agent's license. The speculative claims were voided. The Territorial Land Office issued a new protocol for dual-role representation that Aldrich told Clara quietly outside the courthouse would likely be referenced in similar cases for the next decade. She stood on the courthouse steps in the August sun, and she thought about Thomas, who had spent 8 months fighting a smaller version of this and never gotten to stand on these steps. She thought about the fact that his fight had taught her everything she'd used to win this one, every piece of knowledge, every instinct about documentation and legal sequence and how to read a fraudulent claim. He had given her that. Even in losing, he had given her that. She pressed her hands flat against the courthouse railing, and she let herself stand there and feel all of it, the grief and the gratitude and the relief and the strange, enormous lightness of being a woman who started a summer ready to sell her hair for bread and was ending it, having broken a land fraud conspiracy, and kept her daughter's inheritance intact. Mrs. Holloway put a hand on her arm. All right. Yes, Clara said. Good. Mrs. Holloway squeezed once and let go. Come to the exchange before you head back. I have something for you. The something turned out to be a letter, a response to one Mrs. Holloway had sent on Clara's behalf without telling her to a woman in Pueblo who ran a small cooperative for frontier women learning to manage property and agricultural operations independently. The letter invited Clara to correspond. It said there were women in 3 counties who had been through versions of what she'd been through and had come out the other side with land and purpose and the knowledge of how to keep both. Clara read it on the wagon road back to the ranch with Ellie asleep against her side, and the late afternoon coming in level and warm across the territory. She would write back. She already knew what she would say. The last repayment came out of her wages on the first Saturday of September. She walked it to Cole in a sealed envelope with the full figure written on the outside and a signed receipt inside, and he took it and looked at the figure and looked at her. "We're square," he said. "We're square," she said. She let exactly 3 seconds pass. "Now ask me again." Cole went very still. Clara looked at him across the cookhouse table with her hands at her sides. No counter, no wall, no anchor, but her own 2 feet on her own earned ground. And she looked at him the way she looked at things she had decided about completely, without reservation. "Ask me again," she said. He came around the table, and he asked her quietly, without ceremony, without performance, The way he did everything that mattered plainly and honestly, and with his whole face open to whatever she said back. She said yes. Not because she needed saving. Not because she was tired of standing alone though she was. Not because the ranch was stable and the legal case was won and the future looked better than it had in 2 years. She said yes because she had watched this man be honest when dishonesty would have been easier, patient when impatience would have been justified, and kind in the specific, unsentimental way that respects the person being kind to instead of performing for them. She said yes because Ellie had been watching his face for 2 months and trusting what she saw, and her daughter read people correctly. She said yes because she was 37 days past being the woman who walked into a general store with a braid in her hands and a sick child at home and nothing left to trade but the last beautiful thing she owned. And she had come this far on her own terms, and she was not going to stop now. She was simply choosing to go further with someone beside her. The wedding was small, held at the church in Drywater Crossing on the second Saturday of October, with Ellie in a dress Mrs. Holloway had helped alter from a bolt of blue cotton that Sadie had pressed into Clara's hands 2 weeks prior without accepting any payment for it. Cole's foreman Wade stood up with him. Mrs. Holloway stood up with Clara. The church was half full with people who had watched the summer unfold and understood what they were witnessing, not a rescue, not a charity arrangement, not a widow being taken in. A partnership entered into by 2 people who had seen each other at the worst and chosen each other anyway. After at the ranch, Ellie fell asleep at the supper table with her head on her arms, and Cole carried her to the cabin without waking her, and Clara stood in the cookhouse doorway and watched and felt the specific quiet fullness of a life that had been stripped to its bones and had grown back differently. Not weaker, not the same, but truer. The deed revision came 3 weeks later. Cole brought it to the kitchen table and put it in front of her, without explanation, and she read it and found her name on it as co-owner of Mercer Ranch, full legal, standing equal claim. She looked at him. "You earned it," he said. "The summer you ran this operation saved the ranch. The legal case you built protected the land. That's not sentiment. That's accurate." "You don't owe me this," she said. "I know I don't," he said. "That's why it counts." She signed it. Her handwriting was the same clear, decisive script she'd used to organize legal documents and supply ledgers and repayment schedules, because it was the same hand, the same woman, the same person who had walked into Harper's General Store in July with 19 inches of hair and a child at home in a fever, and the absolute unshakable refusal to be finished. She was not finished. She had never been finished. She had only been waiting for a season that understood that. In the months that followed, Ellie learned to read a horse's full body, not just its ears, and she learned her letters at the kitchen table, where Clara had once counted ration scraps, and she grew loud and opinionated and unafraid in the way that children grow when the adults around them have decided that safety is not something to be hoped for, but something to be built. Clara wrote to the woman in Pueblo, and the correspondence grew into something larger. A network of women across 4 counties sharing knowledge about property management and agricultural operations and legal protections and how to read a speculative filing before it became a crisis. Mrs. Holloway contributed to the letters. Sadie eventually started her own correspondence branch. The ranch survived the autumn and the winter and came into the next spring with stronger fencing, a reorganized cattle operation, and a breeding program that Clara had designed and Cole had capitalized and Wade had declared in his characteristic way to be the best decision the ranch had made in a decade. There had been a day in July when Clara Bennett stood in a general store and placed her braid on a counter and prepared to trade the last beautiful thing she owned for the chance to keep her daughter alive. What changed everything was not a miracle. It was not pity. It was not luck. It was a man who saw what she was doing and understood that what she needed was not charity, but a fair exchange, and a woman who understood the difference clearly enough to demand it take it and build something that neither of them could have built alone. She had walked into that summer with nothing but her dignity, and she had refused to put it down, even when the cost of holding it was almost more than she could bear. And that refusal had been the foundation of everything that came after every document organized, every meal served, every fence, defended, every choice made freely and for herself. That was what saved her. Not the cowboy in the store, and not the job, and not the legal case, and not the ring on her finger or the name on the deed. Her own refusal to be less than she was. That was what saved her. That was what had always been going to save her. Everything else was just the world finally catching up to what Clara Bennett had known about herself all along.